I almost didn't go. Anniversaries at my parents' house always felt like performances where everyone knew their role. My role had been fixed for years. The one who was supposed to smile through comments, translate them later into something less sharp for my daughter, and keep the peace. I told myself I was going for the cake, for appearances, for closure I never quite named. My daughter sat beside me at the long table, feet barely touching the floor, carefully folding and unfolding her napkin. She was 12, soft-spoken, observant. My parents called her the dumb one when they thought they were being funny or honest or motivating. Her cousin, 3 years older, louder, coached for applause, sat across from her, already surrounded by praise. I watched the familiar rhythm take shape. Questions directed one way, compliments flowing freely, my daughter receiving silence, or worse, corrections disguised as jokes. I felt the old urge to interrupt, to defend, to explain her intelligence in terms respected. Then I felt something else underneath that urge. Fatigue. A decision settling. The speeches started after dinner. My father tapped his glass, proud, expansive. He talked about legacy, about fairness, about rewarding promise. My mother nodded along, her smile tight and rehearsed. They announced it plainly. The house would go to the cousin. The family trust, $280,000, would go to the cousin. It was framed as practical, inevitable. Someone laughed lightly as if money had no weight. I didn't look at my daughter right away. I kept my eyes on the table, on the small crack in the wood I'd noticed years ago and never mentioned. I felt heat rise, but it didn't spill over. It surprised me how calm my body stayed. When I stood, chairs scraped. The room quieted out of politeness, not expectation. I smiled because it cost me nothing. I said that my daughter was not part of this equation, not because she was lacking, but because she was already secure. I said she didn't need to compete for approval that came with conditions. I said I had learned slowly that dignity is easier to protect than to repair. My parents' smiles faltered, confused. I could feel the room lean forward. I reached into my bag and placed a thin folder on the table. I hadn't planned theatrics. I'd planned accuracy. Inside were documents my parents hadn't seen, legal confirmations signed months earlier, a modest trust in my daughter's name, funded by my work, my savings, and a settlement from my late partner's estate. Nothing extravagant, enough to guarantee education, stability, choice. My aunt, a retired attorney, asked to look. She adjusted her glasses, flipped through the pages, and nodded once. That nod was the only authority the room needed. No raised voice, no argument, just confirmation. My parents went pale, not because they'd lost money. They hadn't, but because the story they'd been telling themselves no longer held, that they were arbiters of worth, that their approval was a gate. I said one more thing softly, that labels have consequences, that children remember who speaks for them. Then I sat down. No one applauded. The cousin stared at her plate. My daughter looked at me, eyes wide, then calm. She reached for my hand under the table and squeezed once. The rest of the evening moved awkwardly. Conversation resumed in fragments. My parents avoided my gaze. There were no apologies. I didn't expect any. We left early. Outside, the air was cool and honest. My daughter asked if she really wasn't dumb. I told her she never had been, but that it was my job to make sure she never had to prove it to people who refused to see. Later, alone, I felt the cost. Relationships don't break loudly when they've been cracked for years. They just stop holding weight. I felt sadness for what would never be repaired and relief for what no longer needed fixing. I don't know what my parents will say about that night. I know what my daughter will remember, that when the room decided her value, someone stood up calmly and said, "No, that was